Now, it would be foolish of me to ignore certain geopolitical realities that also enter into how many times stories are Googled, viewed, and shared online. But make no mistake, internet traffic is driven by exposure. The media that cover these kinds of stories give or don't give exposure. They're driven in so many instances by their own institutionalized biases. And until that changes, and don't hold your collective breath, we will see more one-sided, lopsided, misguided search numbers on Google and elsewhere, like the 7-1 Notre Dame to Sri Lanka results. And the translation of those numbers, what people should be learning about and caring about, isn't always what they are learning about and caring about.
Sri Lanka and the world reeling after the unprecedented attacks on the Christian community there and on hotels, 7 suicide bombers.
Sri Lankan TV showing this surveillance video tonight, a man with a heavy backpack there, walking along a crowd of churchgoers seen on a church camera.
It fills us with shock and surprise. We didn't expect this kind of violence in Sri Lanka at this time at all.
Then on Easter morning, one after another, the suicide bombs went off. This dashcam video captures the first explosion at St. Anthony's Catholic Church.
And I think what I really would like to emphasize is that it really shows a new pattern. I mean, it's really not following the legacies of religious violence in the past that we have seen in Sri Lanka. And it doesn't really make sense for one religious minority to attack another religious minority.
And also, this reflects the global trend against Christian minorities in several countries. And particularly, I think they've chosen a very important day for Christians, which is the Easter, where Christians observe the coming back to life of Jesus Christ, which is very important to Christian faith. And so it's a very symbolic attack on the center and central message of Christianity.
At another church, St. Sebastian's, about 20 miles outside the city, an explosion destroyed the roof.
But the coordinated bloodbath on Easter Sunday is unprecedented. Hundreds of men, women, and children killed.
The clock now frozen in time. Around that same time, a man with a backpack seen on security cameras approaching St. Sebastian's Church in nearby Negumbo. Investigators poring over these images broadcast on Sri Lankan TV, the man weaving through the crowd. Another camera inside the church showing him pass behind the worshippers. He's reportedly one of the bombers. And moments later, the weapon detonates.
Reverend Anderson, you spoke of this global trend, but does it come as a surprise? Of course, it's shocking, but does it come as a surprise given that there are simmering ethnic and religious tensions in Sri Lanka and have been even in the aftermath of the civil conflict a decade ago?
Not at all. I think just to put this attack in perspective, I think there has been a series of attacks against religious minorities, both Muslims and Christians in Sri Lanka. And particularly Christians have been targeted in the past year or so.
Attacks far from over. In the next 15 minutes, suicide terrorists strike 3 hotels popular with Western tourists. One killer even waiting in line at an Easter brunch buffet before detonating his explosive. On the other side of the country, another church becomes a target. Later in the day, another hotel.
Then, this afternoon, 2 more bombings, including one at the Tropical Inn. 9 blasts in all.
How will Sri Lanka react now? And more broadly, why the alarming rise of religious intolerance throughout the region?
At least 290 people were murdered, hundreds more were wounded. Sri Lankan authorities say the attackers were affiliated with a local terror group. The attackers were radical Muslims. Their motives were religious. Their targets were Christians. None of that is speculation. It's true. Maybe because it is so true and so obviously true, nobody in authority wanted to say it out loud. So instead, they went to great lengths to avoid clear language. Quote, the attacks on tourists and Easter worshippers in Sri Lanka are an attack on humanity, tweeted Barack Obama. Hillary Clinton used the same awkward phrase. I'm praying for everyone affected by today's horrific attack on Easter worshippers and travelers in Sri Lanka, she wrote. Easter worshippers. Why not just say Christians? Nobody worships Easter. There's a reason, of course. Euphemisms are never accidental. Our leaders believe Christians are the problem. They're the dangerous ones.
One could perhaps expect that people would attack symbols of the state or symbols that were connected to Buddhism. And by that saying that, well, we feel oppressed by a singular dominated state. But by attacking these Christian spots and these cosmopolitan hotels, because these hotels are really global spaces in a way, you really communicate to a international community, and you draw their attention to Sri Lanka in ways in which that if you had attacked a ministry or a government minister or a Buddhist symbol,
is that to infer? Is that to infer, Iselin, that this could be orchestrated from abroad?
That, of course, was last Sunday. Now, we discussed the fact that by watching the mainstream media coverage of the horror, you may not have gotten the full scope of what happened and who did the attacks, who were the victims in the attacks. In fact, they'd been described as people worshiping Easter. Well, of course, they were Christians, as we said yesterday, and today ISIS claimed responsibility for the radical Islamist attacks, and that's what they were. Now, the media has begrudgingly acknowledged that fact today.
The president of Sri Lanka asked his defense secretary and national police chief to step down today. They're accused of failing to act on intelligence reports before a wave of attacks.
New security camera video shows two bombers in the Shangri-La Hotel elevator. They get out, and moments later, the blast. One of them was Moulavi Zahran, in the middle in these images released by ISIS.
Just tonight, the Washington Post ran a story with this headline, quote, Sri Lanka church bombings stoke far-right anger in West. As if you'd have to be some kind of Nazi to be upset about church bombings. That's what they seem to think. That's why our leaders consistently ignore the persecution of Christians around the world. When U.S. policy contributes to that persecution, and it does, they say nothing about it. For example, less than 20 years after we overthrew Saddam Hussein, 3/4 of Iraq's once thriving Christian population is gone. They've either been murdered by Islamic extremists, ISIS in some cases, or they've been driven out of the country as refugees. In Syria, Christians lived for generations under the protection of the Assad family. You're not allowed to say that anymore or even know it, but it doesn't make it any less true. It is true. And you can talk to the hundreds of thousands of Christians who fled the country since the U.S. began supporting the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad if you want to know details. But no one in the American media ever asks their opinion. Nobody cares. Nor do we care that so many of our allies in the Middle East, countries that receive billions in U.S. tax dollars every year, repress Christianity.
But in today's world, one way that we measure public reaction to a news